geopolitics with Shikuru were the future.
The country or those countries involved in the conflict. It's just a pretext to solve their own goals as well as to profit from war. That's why they showed up on our doorstep with NATO infrastructure. For years they sat idly by, gazing at the Donbas tragedy, the genocide, at the extermination of Russian people at our ancestral historical lands that started in 2014 after the bloody coup d'etat in Ukraine. In contrast to this behavior that was demonstrated by Europe and until recently the US, is the conduct of the global majority states. They refuse to take sides. They aspire to truly contribute to the creation of a just world, and we're grateful to all the states who in recent years have taken genuine effort to try and find a way out of this situation. These are our partners, the founders of BRICS, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, the Belarus, North Korea. These are our friends in the Arab Islamic world. First and foremost, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia in Europe, and many African and Latin American countries. Unfortunately, so far we haven't been able to stop the hostilities, but the responsibility for that lies not on the majority for this inability, but on the minority, first and foremost Europe, who continue to escalate the conflict. And I believe there is no other goal over there. At the same time, I believe that goodwill shall prevail, and we have no doubt about this. I believe that the situation is changing gradually in Ukraine. No matter how brainwashed people may get, there are still some shifts in their ideology, and in other parts of the world as well. At the same time, the phenomenon of the global majority is a new development in the international life. Allow me to say a few words about that as well. What is its purpose? That the overwhelming majority of states is aimed at implementing their own civilized interests, the main of which is its balanced progressive development. And it seems that it should be natural, that's how it's always been. But in earlier eras, the understanding of these interests was distorted with morbid ambitions, with selfishness, with the influence of expansionist ideologies. And now, the majority of states and nations, that very same global majority, understand their authentic interests. And most importantly, they feel strong and confident enough in order to uphold these interests despite the external pressure. And I should add, by promoting and defending their interests, they're ready to work together with their partners. That is to say, to translate international relations, diplomacy, integration, into the source of growth, progress, and development. The relations within the global majority is a prototype of political practices necessary and effective in a polycentric world. This is pragmatism and realism, rejection of bloc philosophy, absence of rigid, dictated commitments, models where there are senior or junior partners. And finally, it's the ability to align interests that don't always coincide, but at the same time, they usually don't contradict one another. So the absence of antagonism is the main principle. We see a new wave of de facto decolonization that is gaining momentum, where former colonies, aside from statehood, also gain political, economical, cultural, and ideological sovereignty. And in this context, another important date is very important to note here. We celebrated 80 years since the creation of the United Nations organization. It's not just the most representative, universally political structure of the world. It symbolizes the spirit of cooperation, alliance, brothers in arms that helped in first half of former century to unite our efforts to defeat the greatest evil in history, the merciless machine of extermination and enslavement. And of course, the decisive role in this joint victory belongs to the US. Just take a look at the number of victims of the anti-Hitler coalition and everything will become clear. The UN, of course, is the legacy of victory in the Second World War. To this day, it is the most successful experience of creating the international organizations through which we can resolve the most urgent world problems. And we often hear that the UN system is paralyzed, that it's in crisis. It's become the common position. Some even go as far as to say that it has become obsolete and it should be radically reformed. Yes, of course there are a lot of issues in the work of the UN. But we do not have a better alternative than the UN. We have to admit that the problem is not with the UN because its potential, it's virtually endless. The issue is how we, ourselves, these united, and although more often than not now disunited nations, use these opportunities. Of course, UN is facing certain challenges. Just like any other organization, it needs to adapt to changing realities. But in the process of its restructuring, configuration, it is especially important not to lose sight or twist the main idea of the organization, not just the one that was embedded when creating the whole UN system, but also the newfound idea that has arisen in the process of its complicated development. We should recall that since 1945, the number of UN member states has practically quadrupled. The organization that has come up at the initiative of several largest countries during the decades of its existence has not just expanded, it has absorbed many different cultures and political traditions. It has gained diversity, has truly become multipolar, way before the world has taken that path. The potential laid in the UN system is only beginning to unfold, and I'm sure that in the new era we're entering, it will only pick up the pace. In other words, now the countries of the global majority form the convincing majority, even within the UN, which means its structure and its governing bodies need to be brought up into the line accordingly, so that it fully aligns with the basic principles of democracy. We will not deny there is no unanimity as to how to organize the world, which principles it should be based on in the upcoming years and decades. We have entered a long stage of searching, in many ways stumbling in the dark. Once we have a new sustainable system, its framework remains unknown. But we should be prepared that for a considerable time, socio-political and economical processes will be hard to predict and sometimes quite nerve-wracking. In order to keep those clear guidelines and not lose our way, we need a strong support. First and foremost, these are values cultivated in national cultures over the centuries: culture, history, ethical and religious norms. The influence of geography and environment are key elements from which civilizations are born. Special entities that have been created over centuries that determine national identity, value orientations, traditions, all that serves as a guideline, allowing us to find our way and allowing us to weather the storms of rough waters of international life. Tradition is a very distinctive, unique thing. Everyone has their own, and respect for traditions is first and foremost a condition for a prosperous development of international relations, as well as resolution of arising issues. The world has withstood the efforts of unification, of forcing of so-called universal model that went against the cultural and ethical traditions of many nations. Back in the day, the Soviet Union indulged in it, trying to impose its political system. We're aware of it. And I don't think anyone will try to argue that. Then the US took over. But the Europe has come up big as well. But in both cases, nothing was achieved. Perfunctory, extrinsic, artificial, something imposed doesn't last long. And those who have respect for their traditions usually doesn't encroach on others. Today, against the backdrop of international instability It is especially very important to lay your own groundwork of development that isn't dependent on the international whirlwinds. And we see how many countries and nations turn to these foundations. And it's not only happening in the global majority states, but in Western societies as well. If everyone operates and follows these principles, taking care of themselves without wasting effort on unnecessary ambitions, turns out that getting along with others becomes much easier. I would like to give you an example of cooperation between Russia and the US.